And welcome to us. This is, we're closing out our 23rd year of bringing you the Foreign Policy Discussion Group. It's been a great year. We will be joining you again, or you will be joining us again in the fall, but this is our last program for this particular spring. I also want to introduce you to our other members, Tyler Beebe, maybe just raise your hand, Amy Friedman, and Carolyn Resnick, who are with us. So our last session, we were together and we were talking about space. And I think from space, maybe we've looked up at the stars and they've been beautiful. We occasionally see a plane. It's a lot more complicated world now. And as we were hearing from Clayton Swope of CSIS, there are opportunities and great threats to us also in space. So it seems that what we used to think were beautiful stars, there is more up there than just stars. And we are now then returning back to Earth with Professor Sutter. So, Professor Sutter, we welcome you again. It's a delight to have you with us. Last year, about this time, he was speaking to us about China and the South Seas. I think today he's still going to be on China. He is our China expert. And hopefully, you all got this very extensive outline of the topics that he's going to be talking about. I told him that we needed a seminar from him and maybe a days long retreat or but in any case it's an amazing outline, and I hope that you will all if you didn't read it, you will go back through after he speaks, and just it will emphasize, I think, many of the things he was talking about. I think the other point he wants to get across to you is that our situation with China is urgent. um, we read things here and there in the news, we hear things that are going on in the press. Somehow urgency doesn't always come across. So what he will also want to talk about is that there is an urgency. And then I think the question for us as citizens is, how is our government understanding that urgency, and what are we doing? And are the steps that they are taking helping us counter the challenges that China is presenting us with? So before I turn the program over, I would like to, of course, remind you that this program is being taped. It is available for um, screening on our archive on the Chappaqua Library. So if you want to hear again in greater detail or think about further, please visit our archive. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my mouth this morning. Professor Sutter will speak for about 35 minutes. And then, or Bob, how you, the time that you need to cover what you want to
Okay,
cover.
good time.
And then we will continue with questions first from the panelists and then also from our viewers. So please add your questions into the tab or the chat before that is down on the bottom of your screen. And now let me introduce Carolyn Resnick to introduce our speaker. Carolyn?
Oh, well, thank you. Bob, thank you. It's lovely to meet you finally after numerous emails. And I'm astonished at your list of credentials. And thank you for joining this group at the library. He is the professor of practice of international affairs at the Elliott School at George Washington University. He has been that since 2011. He's also has a long and distinguished government career from 1968 to 2001. He included a senior specialist director of foreign affairs and national defense director of Congressional Research Service, as well as the National Intelligence Officer for Far East Asia and the Pacific at the U.S. Government National Intelligence Council, and with the Department of State and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and it goes on. It's truly an astonishing list. He has written 23 books, countless articles, and government reports. His most recent books, which I'm very impressed with since 2021, center on focus on China, Chinese foreign policy in the United States. foreign relations. The fact that you are able to do this, as well as all the other things that you do, and having a full-time faculty position and various advisory roles to the administration at the university is astonishing. And thank you for giving us some of your time, being so generous with your time and expertise. And Bob, go ahead, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I mean, this is always a pleasure to be with you folks and share things that I've learned over the recent period, and I think these are pretty important, and so I want to share them with you. There are three clusters of things that I'm going to be talking about. There's first the sense of urgency, the challenges that China poses to the United States. Oh, the title of the talk I have is Trump, China, and the Struggle for Leadership in Asia. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. And so I want to first explain why this sense of urgency in the United States and what is the nature of this China challenge that we're facing, because it's very multifaceted and complicated. And the struggle in Asia is one part of this fundamental challenge that China poses to the United States. And then the second part is, and that is that information is based on, of course, a lot of scholarship. But I've been working on this for 10 years now, watching the transition in the United States from engagement to acute rivalry with China and why that happened. And it happened in Washington. So I'll try to explain that briefly to show that it happened there. And I was there watching it and working with people and seeing this. It was quite a transformation. And eventually it took over the whole country. The second point I wanted to get at is what do the countries in the region think about this competition between the United States and China? And I and a colleague did a survey in Asia in the summer of last year, looking at the attitudes toward the elections in the United States on the part of it was about 200 people in 10 different Asia Pacific countries, and what they thought about like the possible return of Mr. Trump as president, this kind of thing. And so my findings will be based on that in the second big cluster of things that I'll be talking about. And then the third is something that, of course, we're all interested in, is what is Donald Trump doing and what do the people in the region think about it? Certainly, I've been tracking what the Trump administration is doing, and what the countries think about it. That's been published. And I'm doing a series of interviews for a book on this issue that'll be coming out early next year on U.S.-China. Well, be coming out next year. U.S.-China rivalry in Asia. And so those are the three things that I want to talk about, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on related issues as well when we get into the question period. So without further, if it's okay with you, let's get into the first issue of U.S. hardening against China's challenges. Okay. These things have been developing over 8 years now. We've been hardening our policy in the United States for about 8 years. The Trump administration began this process with a very different national security assessment. Their strategy of national security came out in December of 2017, 1 year into the first Trump administration. And they had a view of China that was, they said China was the #1 danger posed to the United States from a national security point of view. That had never happened before. Soviet Union was always the #1 danger, and China was its partner in many cases in the old days during the Cold War. And so this was quite a change. And the administration people, many of them, were determined to follow this kind of a policy. But Mr. Trump himself was very erratic. And you see this tendency on the part of Mr. Trump today, too. You see sometimes he's this way, sometimes he's that way. And so he didn't follow his strategy. And so it was sort of obscure. Were they really going to do this? Was the United States following this strategy? And all you really knew is that the people that wrote this strategy believed that this should be done, but was it being done? And it was sort of erratic in the first couple of years of the administration. And not to put the onus on the Republicans, because the Democrats were but they were not in line with this view of China. They had a positive view of China. They continued this engagement approach and a very moderate approach that China was not a real danger. And you look at you may remember there was primary elections that were pretty active in 2019, moving into the elections of 2020, and people like Joseph Biden were candidates, and all the candidates were pretty moderate on China. And Biden was asked, because he had a foreign policy expertise, he was the vice president. They asked him questions about China, but the media wasn't really on this issue very much. So the questions would come up at the end of a 1 hour interview. They would ask him, "Oh, by the way, what about China?" And this was his standard position. And he said this at least 10 times. He said, "China? You're worried about China? I'm not worried about China. Why should we worry? We're much stronger than China. Why should we worry about China?" That was his approach. And that was very common at that time. So this core of people in Washington that felt we had to harden our policy toward China were working on this. And a key element, I think the key element, were bipartisan majorities in Congress. They saw this strategy that Trump people had, and they said, yes, that's what we need to deal with China. And Democrats and Republicans on this one. And so it's been bipartisan in the Congress ever since. And they are working away trying to defend America against the range of Chinese challenges. And what are these challenges? Well, the challenges have in three areas. You can look at them. First is security, military challenges. And the focus here is what we're going to focus on in our discussion today is the Indo-Pacific. And China is working to be the dominant power in Asia Pacific. They want to be they are striving to do this. They're doing all sorts of things that build up their forces. This is pretty transparent. You see it. They're building up their forces. They're trying to weaken the U.S. alliances with countries in the region, trying to intimidate those countries and pressure them in various ways. And reach a point where they will surpass the United States in the region and dominate it. And in this situation, why is this a problem for the United States? It's far away, right? Why is this a problem? Well, U.S. strategy has been based for over 80 years on this situation. And the situation was 1942. The Japanese had just attacked the Americans in Pearl Harbor. They proceeded to wipe out all sorts of Allied and other resistance throughout East Asia. They came to dominate the region completely. And the Americans were very much on the defensive. Meanwhile, in Germany, the Nazis had done the same thing in Europe. They had almost Western Europe. They had almost conquered it. Only Britain was holding out, and the United States was trying to support them. But the United States had been very isolationist for 20 years. And so they didn't want to get involved in this sort of thing. And the upshot was they faced this extremely dire circumstance in this situation. And once they finished that war, World War II, they vowed not to do this again, not to allow this to happen, not to allow a hostile power to dominate either the Northeast Asian area or the Western European area. It doesn't mean you had to occupy it yourself, doesn't mean you had to conquer it. You just had to make sure that a hostile power did not dominate it. They didn't do that with Japan. They stood aside in an isolationist stance, and that's what happened. So this lesson, I think, is very important for contemporary policy. It's something that's in the mindset of strategists repeatedly. And so this is and so they look at this as these people look at this as a very big challenge because the Chinese are on the verge of doing this. And will the U.S. be powerful enough to counter it in various ways? And that's the competition that's going on there. And that's what's happening. And that's what we're going to talk about in detail as in the next part of the talk. But the second cluster is something that you need to understand as well. The second cluster of challenges is economic and involves a whole range of different things that the Chinese do that are totally out of line with international norms, totally out of line with the WTO provisions. And yet they get away with it because they're so powerful. And no country will stand up against them in the WTO, for example. Then no one's powerful enough except the United States. And so it's up to the United States to take the lead in this one. But what it's done, it's reached a point where they are now capable of dominating the high technology industries of the future. And these high technology industries of the future will be essential for the United States and for others, and particularly the United States, because the United States is the lead in many of these technologies. And so they will lose that if that happens. And that's a big loss for the United States if that happens. But it's more serious than that. That would be an economic loss for the United States, but it's more serious than that because the militaries of the world, the modern militaries, rely more and more on high technology. The country that has the highest technology will have the superior military force. And this will, if China achieves this, they will become the dominant military power. The United States will be subservient to China. In Congress, where they articulate this thing publicly, they say, we don't want to be dominated by China. No one that I know of in Congress wants to be dominated by China. That's a bad thing. We want to avoid that. Do you want a sense of urgency? This is the kind of thing that leads to this sense of urgency. Now, the third cluster is governance. And here China uses its influence as a very organized society, very organized party-state system. So governance is used in very effective ways. And they basically, internationally, they coerce countries, they win them over with corrupt practices and engaging in what they call elite capture, and use their leverage on everything that they have. Well, not everything, but almost everything they have, in order to coerce countries, to get countries, and there's persuasion too, to move countries to support their positions on international order and challenge the international order that the United States has supported for many years. Now, we're in a period where the United States itself is challenging some of these premises, so that's something to consider. But in the case of China, they're going to use this in a very authoritarian way. And so what are these things? Well, they legitimate these predatory economic practices that China does. They manipulate, they hack and manipulate information in various ways for economic gains and to influence elites and move people in different directions. They oppose, of course, human rights and democracy. They oppose U.S. alliances, and they support the reactions of very aggressive countries like Putin's Russia. And so all of these things, and they want their economic practices to be legitimated, and they want their governance practices to be legitimated. That's what they're striving to do. So all of that is a fundamental challenge for the United States. But the bottom line here is the sense of urgency comes from this sense that this juggernaut that is predicted, that is seen, it's a menace. It's seen as a menace and a fundamental menace. And as a result, America has to defend itself against that. And that's certainly what these bipartisan majorities of Congress have been doing for 8 years, looking for the challenges and countering them. And so this is an ongoing process, but it does speak to the sense of urgency. Now we're going to look at in detail the situation in Asia. That's what we're really focused on for today's talk. That's part of that first cluster where we're trying to block China from being the dominant power in Asia, because we see them, if not now, very much so in the near future, as a hostile force. They're not hostile yet. That's under control up to a point. We're acute rivals, but we're not yet hostile. So that's hopeful, but I think a lot of that is premised on the fact that it's not to their advantage to be hostile at this time. They have too much at stake. The United States is too powerful. These kinds of calculations are the things that compel this kind of more reasonable approach. And that's the approach that maybe American policymakers should think about. And the Biden administration certainly did. That's exactly where they were going with their approach in dealing with this. Mr. Trump has more of the America First attitude, where you don't really pay that much attention to the countries in the region in their attitudes. You do interact with them on various issues, but you really don't take their counsel into account. You don't empower them to be allies and partners the way the Biden administration did. So let's look at what these countries think about the United States in Mr. Trump, what they expected from him back in the fall of, in the summer and the fall of last year. And here, they didn't have much positive to say about the elections in the United States. They didn't like the Democratic candidate either. But they were more worried about Mr. Trump. The Harris candidacy, the Biden administration's approach worked well with allies and partners up to a point, but they were very disappointed with the economic policy. They wanted access to the U.S. market. And Biden was restricting that. He kept the tariffs that Trump had, and he added to them. And so they didn't like that very much at all. But they were worried about Trump because they experienced him in the first administration. He was disruptive, and he was not. He didn't give much attention to the interests of these countries. Therefore, he took unilateral decisions that were very adverse to them, at least initially, and hard to manage. And so this was not, they don't want that. Most of these Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific countries, what are they? Where does this legitimacy come from? It comes from effective governance to allow for economic development, which will give legitimacy to the government. That's what they seek. And so a disruptive force that comes into that is not in their interest for the most part. And now the problem with Mr. Trump at this time, as seen in the past, is that it comes at a time when they also have other elements that add to instability, that complicate their desire to keep development. Keep in mind, most of these are export-oriented economies. So they want access to markets so that they can sell their products, so they can advance their economy and support their legitimacy politically inside the country. And so, but uncertainty comes from this because of the acute U.S.-China rivalry. That really complicates the situation. And then you have this growing protectionism. Mr. Trump and his tariffs, Mr. Biden and his tariffs were seen as protectionist by these countries. But they saw this spreading. It used to be that these export-oriented economies would have pretty free access to the various economies of the developed countries. The developed countries were moving in protectionist ways. And you could say, well, maybe they'll just rely on China. China is as protectionist as they come. They don't talk about this because they want to stay on good terms with China, but China is a very protectionist country and what they do. And they understand that. And so that would limit their options, as you can see. You can work with China in the countries in the region. They work with China providing inputs for goods that are produced and then consumed. And sometimes they're consumed in the region, but often they're sent abroad. They depend on foreign access to foreign markets of people who buy this thing. And that trend is attenuating. That trend is, it's not as strong as it was. Meanwhile, they have other elements that complicate their calculation. North Korea continues to be a real problem, and its nuclear weapons development, and that's really independent of the U.S.-China rivalry, separate issue, and a big problem for them. And then the civil war in Burma, Myanmar. This civil war is an ongoing thing, and they have no solution. And North Korea, there's no solution that you can see on the horizon. And then you have the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And what this showed is that this could happen in Asia. And so what you found is a number of countries got very concerned about this and said, we really have to make sure this doesn't happen again. And so they joined with the NATO countries and they worked together and they supported Ukraine. And Japan was in the lead on this. Also, Australia was very involved in this. But other countries didn't do that. It split them. So India kept its relationship with Russia. They have a strong relationship with Russia. Vietnam did the same thing. And so you had a split in this situation. And then inside these countries, the polities are divided. And so some of the countries in the that are sort of supporting the United States in dealing with China, countries like Taiwan and the Philippines, they're very divided. And so the presidents in these countries want to move forward with the United States and do, but the opposition there controls powerful people in the country. In the case of Taiwan, they control the legislature. In the case of the Philippines, they don't, but they're still very important. And so this leads to division and uncertainty. Adding uncertainty is South Korea, and you're just seeing that play out. The political divisions in South Korea in this presidential crisis have been very graphically demonstrated. The progressives have a different orientation toward the United States, more wary of the United States, much less supportive, whereas the conservative and the president that was just removed, Mr. Yoon, was a conservative. They tend to be more supportive of the United States and more critical of China. But on the other hand, the progressives who may come into power now will be, and they control the legislature in South Korea, they will favor some moderation toward China and a bit more wariness toward the United States. So you can see the complications in the region are multifaceted. They're not just U.S.-China rivalry, but they're a big source of it. And then let's take a look just briefly at this. And in this case, maybe we could put the map up, and so people could see the map, and then we can talk to that. Because I'm going to go through the different parts of the Indo-Pacific so you can see it. And we can talk about which ones are moving in which direction. Now, I'm not sure my screen is a little hazy at this point. I'm not sure how you change that, but I can see the map, but okay, that's what, I can work with that. That's not a problem. Okay, let's just take a look. Maybe it'll clear up. Okay, the first countries that are on that I want to talk about, these are the countries that are very much concerned about the future. They're very concerned about Donald Trump, and this goes back to the last year. They thought that Donald Trump would make a deal with China. They thought he would compromise with China because he says nice things about China all the time, very unique in the United States. And they looked at that and they said, well, but we're facing off with China. Taiwan is here. Philippines are down here. And both of them are taking tough positions against China. And so yeah, we can't see the map. So let's see. Sorry, I'm not sure what I have to do if I have to do something. I thought this was going to be taken care of, but let's see how it works. But I think we can do it. We did send out the map to you, and so I think and many of you know what the situation is there anyway. So whoop, now we don't have.
I'm going to try it again. I don't know why it's dark.
Okay, let's just try it again.
Okay.
But we can work with that though. That shouldn't be a big problem.
Bring up my
So to introduce this, I'll just point out, first I'm going to look at the countries that really are were really worried about Donald Trump coming into power. And that is,
I can't do that, Larry.
and so
No,
and
it's
that
not
involved,
there. It's black, and I don't understand why it's black. I'm sorry. I'm going to put myself on mute. I'm on the phone with Larry. Okay.
thank you. So Taiwan is on the coast of China, mainland China, as you know, and then right to the south of Taiwan is the Philippines. And both of these countries have taken strong positions against China, and they rely on the United States to support them. And they're worried that the United States under Mr. Trump, that's much better. Thank you. So here's Taiwan, here's the Philippines. You see how close they are, and to China. And so they're very worried, and their governments are divided. So their governments. So if something happens, the government might say, "Well, let's make a deal with China." The other side, the opposition, would take power. So that's very worrisome. They were very concerned about Trump making compromises, and of course they didn't, and they were worried when they saw what happened with Ukraine and what he wanted to do with Ukraine. They felt this 24-hour settlement thing was a big mistake for them. In other words, if he does this with Russia, he could do the same thing with China, was the notion. So they were worried about that, not clear how much of a danger they faced. The same situation took place in South Korea. The president there was moving in a direction. He's not nearly as critical as the governments in Taiwan and the Philippines were with China. He was more careful, but he was moving in a very in a way that was much solidifying relations with the United States and with Japan to counter China. And the opposition didn't favor that. And so they too were worried about what Trump would do. And they worried about Trump making a deal with North Korea. And of course, he did in his first term. So they had a lot of concern about that. And the third country, the third area is the fourth country that I'm going to talk about, mention here is Japan. Now, Japan, and by the way, Taiwan and South Korea were also very worried about the economic consequences of Trump's tariffs. He was promising very extreme tariffs, 60% tariffs on China. And that would affect them because their trade is very much integrated with China. So it would have a big impact. And they were not good about this would be very disruptive to them. And disruption is not what these countries want. They want stability if they can get it. And Japan also is on the front lines in this regard, but they were more confident that they could manage the situation. They didn't have these big divisions that these other countries have domestically. And so the Japanese felt, look, we dealt okay with Trump in the first Trump administration. There was a lot of noise about big tariffs. We had to do more in defense. We had to do more in other areas that he was concerned about. And we had to look like we were cooperative, and we did. And we had agreements with him and did negotiations. And in the end, it was much less than you would have expected. The cost was manageable. And that attitude also prevailed in interviews with South Korea and with Taiwan. They felt they had done the same thing, the governments. Now, keep in mind, they're not going to advertise this. They're going to talk about this because that will just set off a reaction. But they did that. And I think please watch that. That pattern is something that we're seeing now happening right as we speak. So, but they were still worried. The Japanese were still worried. But more importantly, the Japanese were looking longer term too. And they said, look, we rely heavily on the United States for our security. And you seem to be moving in a way that dysfunctional. You have a lot of differences in your country. You can't figure out what your policy is. And you have presidents like Trump who disregard allies and partners. And then maybe what Biden was doing will be just put aside and we'll be left in the lurch. And so they were worried about that over the longer term. And then moving further south to countries that are allies of the United States, you have Australia down here. And Australia is critical for the Southeast Asia balance against China, but it's critical in the South Pacific as well. And Australia felt, as they still do, I think, Australia felt that they had managed Trump quite well. Australia does not have a trade surplus with the United States. They have a trade deficit with the United States. For Trump, that's very important. So they're not a part of this problem. And Australia does an awful lot on defense. They don't, some countries don't meet the standards of the Trump administration on what you have to do for your own defense and working with the United States. But Australia generally does. And they're always there when the United States is in a conflict. In a war, they come right in. And they don't have enormous capacity, but they come right in with, and people are on the line in fighting with the United States. So this gives them a lot of confidence that they can manage Trump. But they too are worried about the longer term trend in the United States. Is the United States moving to isolationism? Is it moving away? Will it pull back from Asia? Will it say the hell with this countries? We don't want to do this anymore. It's too expensive. It's they're milking us, taking advantage of us, and so forth. So that was the situation there. So the other areas now, keep in mind that the Indo-Pacific is the area that the United States is most concerned about in Asia. So when you look at the competition between the United States and China in Asia, you really have to think about it in the sense of what matters to the United States. And what matters to the United States is what they call the Indo-Pacific. This is a term that emerged, I think, in the Obama administration, but it's become very important ever since. And it does capture what they're concerned about. They're concerned about the rim. the rim of Asia and the rim around China. And so there they want positions of strength. And so there they want allies and partners and so so it starts with Japan to the north and goes all the way down the continental rim of Asia. Southeast Asia is very important in this, and India is sort of the western base of it. Do they care about Russia in that regard? Well, Russia is sort of a different issue, and it's very difficult. And so, no. Central Asian countries and Mongolia, I think, no. The U.S. was very interested in Central Asia when it was involved in Afghanistan, but that's over now, and the interest, I think, is quite low. So the competition is taking place mainly in the countries that I just mentioned, from Japan to India in the west, Japan in the north, and going down into Australia and New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. And that's not on this map, but strategically it's very important in dealing with in dealing with the challenges that you face with China from a security point of view. Okay, so India positioned itself in the elections as very outwardly non-committal, not favoring either candidate. They did this in the 2016 elections when that elected Trump. They did this in the 2020 elections that elected Biden, and they remained that way in the 2024 elections. But they seem to get along with Trump. And what you found in the latest episode, looking at the current situation, is that they're working on a deal with Trump on his demands for India is subjected to tariffs, just like many other countries, most other countries. They've been paused, as you know, but the tariffs are still there. And so they have to deal with these, and they're going to come up with some arrangement. But India is, I think, fairly confident that they will keep the United States on their side in dealing with China. And they need that because China is much more powerful than India, and they see China as threatening. So this sense of danger, urgency that I was talking about in the United States, that's very evident in India's view of China. And so, but at the same time, they want to be non-aligned. And that's part of their identity. That's very in part for their political legitimacy. So they stay to that position as well. And they have a strong position, a strong relationship with Russia. They continue that relationship. The U.S. accommodates that. They don't like it at all, but they want to keep that Indian polity on their side in the competition with China. So they're not too concerned. They don't have the sense of urgency that you see in some of these other governments. And the Southeast Asian countries, generally, they don't have that sense of urgency either. They are pretty relaxed about this. They have been able to balance the pressures that come from the United States and the pressures that come from China. They get them both. And sometimes they feel they need to align a little bit more with China. Sometimes they do and really commit to China. Countries like Cambodia have done this. But usually they try to keep a balance so that they can, because that's the advantageous position to have for them. And it allows for them to get benefits from both sides, to have access to their markets as much as possible, and to keep them on to keep the balance. And the situation, therefore, shows there's a competition between the United States and China. These two entities are pretty powerful, both, and therefore they can't dominate. And so that gives them a middle power, in the middle of this, some room for maneuver, if you see what I mean. It's advantageous. So these are just a review of how they look at this. And China itself sees the elections. They were very negative toward the elections. They thought both of them as trying to counter China. Biden was doing that in his own way, in various ways, and very significant ways. And China was opposed to that. And Harris promised to continue that and probably add to it. And then with Trump, they just were, they found Trump to be seeking deals with them. They did do a deal with Trump on trade issues in 2000. It began in 2019 and took a year. And then 2020, January, they had the deal. and it was starting to be implemented, but it was put aside, blown out, if you will, by COVID. COVID emerged in the United States in a big way in March of 2020. This was right in the middle of the election campaign. And so the Trump administration shifted away from prosperity, which was destroyed by the COVID. It was horrible. And 100,000 people were dying in the United States every month during this period. And really a terrible period. And Trump, and then Trump just became very hard line toward China. They were the cause of COVID, and then the trade issues. They just unleashed all the negative elements in the United States government that wanted to harden policy toward China. Now they had a free rein, and so tremendous hardening here. So China saw this, and they said, "This guy is unpredictable. We don't know what he's going to do," and he's very disruptive, and they don't want to be disruptive. They want to keep advancing, but they don't want to do it in ways that will be disruptive, because that's not good for their economy and their developing of their power. And so these kinds of, so they looked at Trump as somebody that they had to watch. Let's see what he'd say, but they didn't have high expectations. So for the rest of the presentation, I'd just like to now look at the third topic that I'm going to talk about, is the Trump administration 2.0, if you will, the second Trump administration, and the implications of that administration. And here I'm going to have.
Do you want me to take down the
I'll be coming. Yeah, you can take down the net map, but I'll be coming back to it at the end of this third.
Let's just leave it up, okay?
Yeah, leave it up.
That's
Maybe
okay.
that's because you can. I think
You
there's a
get
little
trouble.
box you might be able to see me, so if you need to. But anyway, so what you find here is that there are four key areas of emphasis, and that we need to talk about in looking at the competition. Who's leading? Are the Chinese leading in the competition in Asia? Are the Americans leading? What are the factors that we need to see that we need to pay attention to that are happening with Trump now in power? What does it happen? Well, number one, Trump has reversed Biden's seeking, gaining, and using strong relations with allies and partners to strengthen U.S. power and influence in dealing with major opponents like China and Russia. So they're just not doing that. And they're doing the opposite. And in Europe, they're definitely doing the opposite. Trump, in its first administration, criticized allies and partners, but it was erratic and much less intense and impactful than we're seeing in Trump Point 2. Not so much in Asia, much more in Europe and in other places, as we'll talk about. Most dramatic here is the reversal seen in public disdain for Ukraine and the European allies, and strong coercive measures targeting Ukraine in seeking a settlement of the war in Ukraine on terms that will be supported by Russia, and adopting the Russian position on some of these issues. Just an amazing change. And then the criticism of the NATO countries is extraordinary. It's saying that's been a premise of the U.S. foreign policy for 80 years, and now it's just not there anymore. They're viewed with disdain. And this has shown up in various ways, not just with Trump, but with Vance, the vice president, and so many others. And then you have similarly abrupt and negatively impactful threats directed at Canada, Mexico, Denmark, Panama, and Colombia, to force accommodation on various issues: immigration, trade, all sorts of different autos, all sorts of things. And you have ongoing complaints from Trump and his administration leader regarding the allies and partners in Europe and Asia taking advantage of the United States in trade issues and not doing their share in defense. These are the two big complaints they have. So they want equitable trade balances, more allied military preparedness, and greater military burden sharing. So that's pretty bad in that sense. Some offsetting things for the Asian countries. The main thing, as I mentioned, is that they're not the target of this. Very little. Some, but not a lot. And so the Japanese don't get criticized much. South Koreans, similarly. There's some, but nothing like what we're seeing with the Western Hemisphere countries and with NATO countries. Okay, then the second segment, which we're all familiar with, is tariffs. These tremendous tariffs that he's undertaken, and he also has export and investment controls as well. And these are causing great disruptions and restrictions in international economic interchanges. And so you have this in Asia, Indo-Pacific, it's primarily been focused on China, heavily focused on China, but it was across the board with these reciprocal tariffs, and there was a 10% increase in tariffs that existed. And so those tariffs, the reciprocal ones, have been paused. They're not doing that. They're waiting to see the deals that they can make, and they're flagging these deals as good things. So there was an op-ed in the Washington Post on Sunday by the Vice President Vance, talking about these things, and he said his recent visit to India was a key model for these kinds of deals, and it's very similar to the kinds of deals we were talking about in the first Trump administration. You don't know the full details of it, but in the end, the governments that were doing these deals found that they met their interest and they weren't very costly to them. And so we'll have to wait to see how they turn out in this administration. So that offsets the sensitivity on this issue. And it underlines the utility of this kind of deal making on the part of these Indo-Pacific countries. They're good at deal making. The Japanese would remind us, as they did, they would remind us that, look, we've been negotiating with you for 50 years on autos. Remember when Japan was a big focus of American criticism and so forth? And what about the auto restrictions and other type of restrictions? Well, in the end, it really didn't amount to a heck of a lot in changing the situation. Okay, and then the tariffs are sort of not well thought out because they have consequences which lead to inflation, leads to market instability, and this is almost the big tariffs that he announced in the Liberation Day of April 2nd had a tremendously negative impact on the markets. And Mr. Trump's campaign is prosperity. You're going to have prosperity with me. I run the economy, and this hurt him. And that seemed to push him in a very different direction get back to the deal making rather than emphasize the actual substance of the tariffs. And then what you find here is now but the impact of the Trump policies are very disruptive. And the impact of his disregard for the countries in the region, contrary to what Biden was doing, is negative. And you add that together with the rhetoric of the Make America Great Again and America First types of approaches that the Trump government is known for, what you see is that this is a trend leading to the United States pullback from the region. Adding to this is the third element of pressures on countries like Panama and Greenland and things like that, and pressures on Ukraine and so forth. In addition to these economic practices, what does it say? Well, America may be withdrawing from Asia. America may not be prepared to meet its commitments to the region. Or we'll just change them, unilaterally change these commitments. And move home and focus on home. And China specialists see this in particular. They see a disengagement, a trend of disengagement from Asia, and they like it. They think it's good for them because it will make it easier to dominate the region. And this is seen in the interviews we did in last year. We saw it in Australia. We saw it in Japan. We saw this in Singapore. They are very concerned about this. These are strategically oriented countries that think about these things a lot. And as I probe in looking at the situation in 2025, I suspect these things will have been increased considerably because it's actually been followed through on this. And then we have this fourth cluster of issues, and this is Mr. Trump's actual policies, and particularly his China policy. And his China policy is conflicted. So on the one hand, he's very positive about Xi Jinping. And what I say is positive. I went back to that sense of urgency and the hardening of U.S. policy. No politician in Washington said positive things about Xi Jinping during the campaign. That just didn't happen. The media in the United States is now very negative toward China. And public opinion is very negative toward China. All of this came in over time. In the beginning, in 2017-18, really it was only in Washington, inside the Beltway, that this was happening. But it's spread, and it's now pervasive in the society. But not with Trump. He says these positive things about Xi Jinping, and nobody really calls him on it. He just does it, and so they said, and he's in much more control of the government than he was in 2017-18 when he entered office then. That time he had all sorts of obstacles in his way. Now Republicans control the majorities in both the House and the Senate, and he controls the Republican Party in a way that I haven't seen a leader control the party, their party in this way, really in my professional lifetime. Maybe Lyndon Johnson did it for a while, but I can't think of anybody that did that in this period. So this is maybe Franklin. No, it's really hard to. I just don't know. So just think about it. And he, for example, he shifted totally the position on Russia, and there are all sorts of people in the Republican Party who were very critical of Putin and very critical of Russia. What did they do? What did they do? And they did nothing. They just kept quiet or endorsed what he was doing. And so this is something that the people in Taiwan and the Philippines and South Korea and Japan in particular that are worried about Trump making a deal with China say, well, he could do the same thing with China. He could come in and then win the congressional support for this, and it would happen, and we'd be sunk. And so this is a key element of his approach. But I'm going to look at the other side. And the other side is more reassuring in that way. If you want to defend yourself and you think the U.S. will continue this kind of countering the challenges coming from China. Number one, the resistance that would happen. This one, it'd be unlike Russia. This one, I think, would agitate public opinion, agitate media opinion. And in Congress, these members have been working for 8 years to harden the policy. They're not going to change their policy overnight. And they've been working on this. It's not something that they just feel. It's something they do. And so I think this is going to have a big impact. I think he may lose if he does this. And so the upshot here is that this is more risky for him politically, if for no other reason not to do it. But he has other reasons as well not to do it. And of course, other signals you get from the administration, they're hardening. So the Congress continues its efforts to harden, and the administration continues to build up military forces, work with allies and partners on military issues. They're working with them and building up American capacities. They're proposing a very big increase in defense spending, for example. That's going to focus on China. And so that's a very, very important issue. And then you have these signals from the administration leaders like Vice President Vance. And he's made it clear in his tenure as a leading member of the Congress on foreign policy issues and in his vice president situation, he said, why are we being moderate toward Russia? And he makes the point that we're doing this so that we can preserve resources to focus on where the real danger is, China. So that's what he wants to do. So that's an America First movement attitude that you see in Congress. Marjorie Taylor Greene, some of you may have heard of her. She feels that way too. And so not all the America First people do, but a lot of them do. In other words, pull away from Europe and focus on the danger coming from China. So that's going to lead to hardening toward China, not some breakthrough with China. And then Secretary of State Rubio had a very, long reputation of being very hard on China when he was in Congress. And he's explained it this way, and this is public. He put it out as a State Department statement. He said, "Look, we can't continue to accept a Russia-China alignment that would be targeted against us. We have to do something about that. And what we're going to do is try to peel away Russia from China, because China is the main danger." So do you see the point here that this is still very hard toward China? So what to watch for in looking out in this situation? Well, we have to look at, is the Ukraine peace deal going to work? And most of this is looking at, okay, we have these postures, are they going to work? And are they going to work to the benefit of the administration? So Mr. Trump has put himself out on this issue in Russia, and he's endorsed their positions in many respects. Is the peace deal going to work? That's a big one. Is there going to be a summit with China? They were talking a lot about this, a lot of discussion, and would there therefore be a trade deal, or maybe some other deal that would follow that? Will they follow through on their various economic restrictions? And we've already seen case after case, and the reciprocal tariffs were a very big case where they just backed away. They said this is too, they did, and they're trying to back away on China. So I think this is because it affects prosperity, it affects the markets, it affects the political things that are their priorities, their political priorities. And so those are all uncertainties. And then will they continue to support allies and partners in their efforts to counter China? This is something that Biden did very well. Obviously, Trump doesn't discuss these issues. There is little interaction with them at the very senior level, as Biden had all sorts of discussions with these folks. But they do want them to be on the side of the United States from a defense point of view in particular. And you see this in the Secretary of Defense's visits to Asia. He emphasized this. Rubio, the Secretary of State, he emphasizes this in his discussions. And so will they actually do it? Obviously, it won't be high-level diplomacy in this regard. It'll be, and it's focused heavily on security, which is not all that welcome in the region. It's needed, but it's not all that welcome. They would like to have a multifaceted economic, governance, and security discussions. And then will the countries in the region accept this? Or will they react in ways that said, we've got to find another way, and we can't rely on the United States? Now, this is very important. The U.S. power, I think, is quite important for all of these countries that I mentioned, negative for China, obviously, but for the others, it's very important. Even though countries that hedge, that maneuver to the United States has to be strong and involved in the region to allow the hedging to take place. If the United States leaves, what's their choice? They've got to accommodate China. And most of these countries don't want to be dominated by China. They see the record of what China does when a country dominates them, and they don't want to be in that position. And so this is they want to control their destiny. So, and fundamentally, the thing to watch is, will all of these various challenges that the United States faces under the Trump administration, all these changes that have taken place, will American people continue to support them? And I think they met a real trouble spot with the big tariffs, and they had to back away. So what's going to happen with all these other things? And I'm talking about the Musk initiatives and just all sorts of concerns that have risen as a result of these 100 days of efforts. And so I think when I add this up, I look at the situation. I can just do a brief rundown here of who's doing what. I think the Biden administration improved U.S. positions with Japan, with South Korea, with Taiwan, with the Philippines. These were big gains, as well as with Australia, and I think with India. And then and to a degree with Vietnam, and let's see where else. And of course, he had good relations with Singapore and Malaysia. But the advances are where I said under Biden. With Trump up to 1.0, what we saw is an overall decline of the United States' influence in the region. Because of his disruptive policies and because of his inattention to these governments and what they were concerned about, and the posturing that became very and his erratic behavior. In other words, that he really wasn't tough on China until March of 2020. You know, the last 9 months of his administration. So it was very peculiar situation. Now that's come back. And so that's, I think overall, it's going to lead to some decline in the United States' position in the region. How much? It's hard to know. And the near term, probably not excessive. In the near term, yes, these countries don't like the Trump government and what it's doing, but they still need the United States. They need the market access, and they need that counterweight to China. And I think that's very important. And so it'll limit the damage in cases like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Australia. And I think India's been okay with this up to this point. These countries in Asia, the ASEAN countries, they will see this as a negative. But how much? They still need the United States in many cases, in most cases. They're not prepared. Their strategy would be their legitimacy that rests with their effective strategy would be fundamentally adjusted, would change, and therefore would be very difficult for them. So that's the short-term thing. So maybe if Trump is, I mean, we got a long way to go, and it could decline a lot based on what happens. But what we've seen is self-corrections in the administration on the tariffs. We'll see what the ultimate outcome of this is. And I think that's they're not rigid in that sense. And so that could lead to adjustments that would be less negative for the countries in the region. After that, or what the broader trend, and the thing that we've been talking about in case of the views of Japan, Australia, Singapore, and others, is the reliability of the United States going forward. Is the United States policy changed? Has America changed fundamentally in this regard? And we just, at this point, it's very hard to reassure that. What you find is a trend moving in a very different direction. Is that America? Is that what they're going to be able to rely on? Is that reliable? And I think it's seen as much less reliable than what was there before. And so how do they deal with their strategy in that situation? So those are the kinds of things that I would just close with. And so we've seen these three clusters of things. I think we have a sense of urgency, why it's there, and I don't think it's going away. It's very powerful. And then you see the varied reactions in the region to the situation in last year and what they were worried about. And those worries have increased now that Mr. Trump's in power. And I think that's having an overall negative effect. Will it be of lasting significance, profound significance? I don't know yet. And I think that's just too early to tell. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are sort of tight on time, but Bob, I think you had such, interesting things and important things to say. What I'd like to do so that we do stay somewhat in line is that we take maybe about 10 minutes of questions. I think, Bob, you were so thorough that you answered, I think, a lot of questions all of us had. And of course, we'd love if you had some sort of crystal ball that could answer some of the questions and concerns that we have going future. But I guess, we, as well as our experts, are all somewhat in a quandary as to exactly what the future is going to look like and what trajectory we actually are on. So anyway, Carolyn, do you want to open with the first question? Carolyn, you're on mute.
Carolyn?
Bob,
Yes,
okay.
I do.
Carolyn?
Okay, Joan, yeah. Thank you, Bob. This is marvelous. Thank you for what you sent us, which is helps us to make sense as you're talking about a really complex area. Just a couple of questions. North Korea, which seems to me to be of profound importance for this area. How can you comment on that in China?
Sure. Yeah. Yes, it's as I mentioned, this is one of those things that's not going to be settled. It's going to continue to be a problem. There's nobody with a decent answer to it. And it's a very uncertain situation. I think it's for South Korea, it's fundamental. Japan, it's fundamental concern. Both of those countries and others in the region are very concerned about this as well. And the Chinese, the Russians are now supporting North Korea. That's a big negative turn. And you have this emerging sort of alignment between Russia and North Korea and China and North Korea. Although China has a different interest than Russia and is not so excited about their involvement, not so positively excited about their engagement with North Korea, but understands the realities of it and is determined to keep on good terms with Russia. And Russia is determined to keep on good terms with them. So this is a ongoing problem, which adds to the uncertainty that pervades the region. It's a sense of uncertainty.
Thank you.
Tyler, you had your hand up. Yep.
Yeah, Bob, as you have very ably pointed out, thank you very much for a great talk. There are numerous scenarios which could evolve here. Is one I hope doesn't happen, but it might. And that is if the Chinese, with Xi feeling a little more rambunctious and perhaps aggressive in the area than he already is, steps up the intimidation, which he's already started doing with the patrols around Taiwan and so forth, and somehow manages to perhaps convince the Taiwanese that resistance is never going to work that well. And in Taiwan, you've got the KMT running the legislature, and they're a little bit more friendly and perhaps willing to be compliant with China. If over time she was to implement blockades or quarantines or embargoes, which would finally create submission by Taiwan, and again, I don't think that's likely, but it could happen. What would you see the outcome being in, say, 10 or 15 years if, in fact, Taiwan agreed to gradually reintegrate into China? Again, an unlikely scenario, but it could happen.
No,
And
I don't think
Trump
it's
wouldn't have to commit himself to military intervention. He'd be kind of happy to see that happen.
right. No,
Yeah.
I
So
think you've laid out a plan, an approach that Beijing is actually on. That's what they want. They
yeah,
want that to happen. And so they don't want to fight a war with the United States over Taiwan. They want to get it through ways like that.
sure.
And so this would be a big victory for Beijing. It would lead to a fundamental reevaluation of the alliance relationship by Japan. This would be a fundamental threat to Japan. And so they'd have to figure out where they're going to stand on this issue because the U.S. let this happen. And so would the U.S. let this happen? I think there would be, if it's an incremental type of thing and we have changes in government, and sure, I mean, you can't rule that out at all. And so at this point, I'd say no, that won't work at all. But if it's a different atmosphere, yes, I think it could. And so, yes, I think this is the kind of scenario that specialists that deal with Taiwan always take into account. This is because it's certainly the preferred way that China would like to do this. to work with their supporters in Taiwan to move toward unification, and that's what they were doing with the Ma Ying-jeou government, 2008 to 2016, and it was pretty successful up to a point. But then Taiwan people rebelled against it, just turned against it. That was quite dramatic, and Beijing has been very unhappy ever since, and using these various means to get the process back to the way they want.
You also have the model of Hong Kong as well.
Right.
Okay.
And the model of Hong Kong Hong Kong turned out to be so negative to the people in Taiwan that it elected the party that was this is the Tsai Ing-wen is the name of her government. She took power in 2016, and she was up for re-election in 2020. And most of us thought she wouldn't win, but Hong Kong intervened, and everybody in Taiwan looked at that and they said, "Oh my God, this is what's going to happen to us." And so they switched, and they supported her. And so the the biggest asset I think we have in many of these cases. Why do these countries want to support the United States? Because they've been punished or had negative experiences with China. That's been very influential in Taiwan, the Philippines, South Korea, Japan. All of them have been treated and Australia, all of them, and India, all of them have been treated harshly by China. And so this idea of, oh, we're going to be a peaceful force, they've seen the other side of this. They've experienced it. It's not like they've just seen it. They've experienced it. And of course, we are too. We have that in common, if you see what I mean. So thank you for raising. Okay, I'm getting off the point, but go ahead.
Sorry, we have one more question. Amy, do you want to end our question?
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Sutter. Great comprehensive talk. You know, you mentioned in your talk the idea about legitimacy. And, you know, it feels like as the Trump administration came in, Xi Jinping was already facing domestic problems, economic problems, a lot of discontent, particularly from young people, high levels of unemployment. I wonder how much you think that the current confrontational approach is really posing a legitimacy problem for Xi.
I think it does. I think you're right. And I guess it's a question of how much attention do you give to the weaknesses of China? They have weaknesses too. Our weaknesses are, boy, are they evident. You live in Washington, you see we show our weaknesses every freaking day these days. It's really awful in that sense. And China, of course, hides them completely. So how do you make a judgment as an informed citizen as to, okay, how do we compare this situation with that situation? If you did that, if you looked at just what was published and what's obviously the China's going to win hands down, if you see what I mean. So I think these are serious matters for Beijing, and the longer term, and they do have a longer term problem of they may not be as powerful as they go along. The Belt and Road Initiative has already been curbed dramatically. They were throwing lots of money around. They're not doing that anymore. They've stopped. And that was a big asset they had. They could come in and use persuasion, say, we'll give you $1 billion program here, and finance that. They can't do that now. So this is the kind of situation they're in. So I think it makes them cautious, and which is good. It helps. If you want to compete, have rivalry, and compete for influence, well, this keeps it within bounds. Remember, Biden worked really hard to make sure that the competition would not lead to conflict, and the Chinese seemed to be. They came on board. They agreed to have these. So I think that's the way I would put it. I don't want to downgrade their capacities. They have tremendous capacities, and Tyler just talked about what they can do in Taiwan, for example, and how they could surround Taiwan. And then what would the U.S. do? It's an act of war. What are you going to do? So that's they can do things like that. So I think we just have to be realistic, and I think that, but the need for restraint and need for avoiding military confrontation between the two sides, avoiding war, I think is very high in both sides, both the Chinese side and the U.S. side. And Chinese side is part because of these various domestic issues. It would be disastrous war if you never, and just your legitimacy would really be on the line. So you're not going to do this because you want to have, oh, I want to make an accomplishment. You have to, I'm going to attack Taiwan, therefore that'll be great. No, that will be, that's very risky. And I think would be a last type of resort for some reason.
Bob, so thank you so much. You've given us much to think about. I'm not sure that you've come to anybody. In fact, I think you've probably said this is very urgent. We need to be paying a lot of attention. And also, you seem to have some faith that certainly our Congress have some good people there who are conscious. And hopefully they will be able to control the situation and we won't lose all our allies, which I think, benefits us. And that, we will see, I think we see China for what they are. I don't know that we understand all the ramifications of what they're doing. So I think we're hopeful that we do have leadership somewhere that will help us. But we will certainly all be wondering how this is going to be going. And I think for all of us, informed populace, are the probably ultimately the best check. And staying true to our values and our understanding of what we want to happen for our country. So thank you very much.
Thank you
And
for
to
the
all of you.
opportunity. It's very well put. Thank
I
you.
said, well said, both said it too.
Yeah.
And
Thank
so
you,
for all
Bob.
of us, thank you. And
Thanks,
to
Bob.
our viewers, we will see you next fall. And Bob, we look forward to having you again and we'll see what's happened in the next time period.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's going to be one of those things. And we'll have a nice summer. Enjoy it's lovely in Chappaqua in the summer.
And
Thank
thank
you.
you all. Thank you, Bob. It was wonderful. And to the Foreign Policy Discussion Group Planning Committee, we thank you here from the library for having such a great slate of programs this semester, if you want to call it. And we look forward to the next one. So thank you all for joining us, Bob. Again, this was just a little eye-opening for me. So thank you. Have a wonderful summer, everyone. Foreign Policy Discussion Group, have a wonderful summer too. And we hope to see you again in the fall. Goodbye, everyone.